In Buffalo, New York's East Side, a man is gunned down in broad daylight. Evidence at the scene is sparse, and police can do little to solve the latest in a string of murders. It would take a single witness and a massive effort to protect him for prosecutors to bring a notorious gangster to trial. As violent turf wars raged on Buffalo's East Side, residents lived in fear of being caught in the crossfire. Witnesses refused to testify against a ruthless gang leader and his accomplices. The community needed someone willing to take a stand against the gangs. According to prosecutor Frank Clark, they found one.
They were selling dope and killing one another in order to gain tactical and business advantages. And this was the first time we had in a number of years a chance really to get in and prosecute a case, because we had a witness who not only saw everything, not only who was credible and articulate, but was willing to testify.
In the fall of 1988, the east side of Buffalo, New York was falling into the hands of gangs specializing in the sale of crack cocaine. When they attempted to take over the existing numbers rackets, a turf war broke out in the streets. On the afternoon of October 25th, on Kretner Street, a young man who lived in the neighborhood was helping a woman with her groceries.
Careful now. Oh, fine.
Two young men came around the corner. One fired 3 shots, and they fled the scene. The gunshots were heard by residents throughout the neighborhood. The woman who was standing next to the victim rushed into her house to call 911. The call was one of many received by the communication center of the 1st Precinct.
911, Buffalo Police, can I help you?
Callers reported that a man had been shot.
In the city of Buffalo, and a person has been shot. Is that person down? 11? What is the location?
Police units were dispatched to the scene. When they arrived, police found a young man shot in the abdomen and chest. He was alive, but gasping for breath. A fire department rescue squad arrived a few critical moments later. As paramedics attended to the victim, police secured the scene. Detectives from the 1st Precinct arrived and were briefed by a uniformed officer at the scene. They began to question bystanders. Martha West was standing right next to the victim when the shots were fired. But she said she was getting a bag out of the trunk of her car when the victim fell. She never saw the shooter. Another man standing nearby did have some useful information about the shooting.
James Wright.
His name was James Wright. Married and a father to 2 young sons, the 41-year-old Wright told detectives that he worked as a custodian at a nearby church. He said he had been driving the church van delivering groceries to the elderly when he heard a scream. He also saw 2 men running down the street. He thought there had been a purse snatching, so he followed the men as they disappeared around a corner. But after pursuing the men for 2 blocks, Wright found himself staring down the barrel of a gun.
Right up to him and just shot him. Boom,
Wright
just
gave
killed him.
detectives a
Kept
description
running
of
on
the
down
2
this
men
way,
he
one
had
shot.
followed
No,
from
no,
the
sir,
crime
two,
scene.
Two, mister. Two. It was 2 of them. Now,
Investigators learned that the wounded man was 25-year-old Larnell Cottrell. Under a parked car, detectives found a spent bullet. Paramedics had found another bullet when they lifted the victim onto the stretcher. Both slugs were copper-jacketed and were of the same caliber. Investigators met at the 1st precinct to discuss the case.
Have we checked with the mailman or anything else? Has anybody been in the area? It was a daytime shooting?
It was a daytime shooting. It'd be a good idea with the
Check
mailman.
The victim,
Mailman.
Larnell Cottrell, had died at the hospital, and the suspects who fled the scene were now wanted for murder.
They have been debriefed.
Would it appear to be a large caliber weapon as we've had in the past?
Right now, it appears it's probably a large caliber.
Detectives reviewed the physical evidence at the scene
Type of wound we
and
haven't been
discussed
able to
possible
actually
witnesses
identify
to the
somebody
shooting.
who did this right now. Mr. Wright is our only witness right now. We don't have much else going.
The detectives decided that for his own safety,
Daytime shooting
James
doesn't
Wright
seem
should
to
be questioned at the
any
police
motive that
station.
we can establish right now, so we'll have to see what we can do.
Wright agreed to come in for an interview with detectives. He recounted what he had seen and done earlier that day. Amazingly, Wright had memorized the license plate of the car belonging to the 2 men he had followed. When police ran the license number, they discovered it was registered to a woman believed to be the girlfriend of one of East Buffalo's most dangerous criminals, Donald Sly Green. The detectives now suspected the murder was gang-related. They showed James Wright a photo lineup and asked him if he could identify either of the 2 men he had seen. According to Detective Daniel DePiro, he immediately pointed out Sly Green.
right here. I am absolutely
And he went right to the picture of Sly Green. He didn't waver. He looked at it, and that's him. And that was Sly Green, which stunned the both of us, myself and my partner. It just doesn't happen that quick.
The day after the shooting, investigators found another witness who said he could identify Cottrell's killer. A janitor from the holding pen 1 flight above the homicide office had spoken to Stephen Brown, an inmate at the jail, and learned that the prisoner had witnessed the shooting. Detectives DePiro and Grabowski interviewed Brown. He told them he was on the street at the time of the shooting and saw the man who pulled the trigger. The killer was Sly Green, he claimed. But Brown's background made him a questionable witness. Investigators knew Brown was a drug addict with an extensive criminal record who had been arrested that afternoon for shoplifting. It was clear to investigators that James Wright's testimony would be crucial if they were going to make their case. Based on Wright's photo identification, a warrant was issued for Sly Green's arrest. Green was well known to police. He was the leader of a gang known as the LA Boys. Now 29 years old, he had been in trouble with the law for nearly 2 decades. At the age of 14, in his East Buffalo neighborhood, Green and an accomplice entered a grocery store late one night and robbed the clerk at gunpoint. On the way out of the store, Green shot and killed the woman. He would spend only a year in a juvenile detention center for the murder. At age 16, an armed bank robbery attempt would send him to a state prison for 10 years. After his release in 1984, Green went back to a life of crime. He returned to Buffalo to join his brothers Clayton and Gary Green. Together, they organized the LA Boys. With suspected connections to Los Angeles gangs, the LA Boys soon controlled much of the illegal drug trade on Buffalo's east side. As the violence increased, East Side residents became more fearful. Violent crimes were becoming commonplace, but investigators were finding little evidence to solve them. At the Catrell crime scene, 2 spent bullets had been discovered on the ground near the victim. A third was recovered from the body during an autopsy, confirming statements made by witnesses who said 3 shots had been fired. Forensic firearms experts examined the bullets using a stereo microscope. Tests indicated the bullets that killed Catrell were all .41 caliber, most likely fired from a Smith & Wesson revolver. But the gun had not been found. Detective Sergeant Daniel Rich was part of the evidence collection unit that processed the crime scene.
We did look for the gunner in the area. The witness told us that the perpetrator had run down the street, and police officers combed the area, as well as myself. We did not come up with a gun.
Investigators did, however, find the getaway car. Police recovered the vehicle, abandoned a few blocks from the crime scene. The car was examined by forensic specialists from the Buffalo Police Department. The results were disappointing. To Erie County Assistant District Attorney Joseph Maruzak, this made the eyewitness testimony of James Wright even more important.
We find the car, the police find the car later that day, but it's wiped clean. There's no forensic evidence, there's no fingerprints, no nothing. But we know of Wright's ability to make an identification.
Armed with James Wright's testimony, prosecutors were anxious to put Donald Green in custody. In addition to his illegal drug activities, the leader of the LA Boys was suspected of involvement in prostitution, gambling, and even kidnapping. But authorities never had enough to convict. He seemed untouchable. Deputy District Attorney Frank Clark hoped this time would be different.
With Wright, we had a chance to finally make inroads on this kind of gang war that was going on.
And this is the car he would, see, I had to have it.
With a victim in the morgue and a witness willing to testify, the Erie County District Attorney's Office wanted this to be the case that would put Green away. The office helped the police launch a massive search for the killer.
There was a manhunt of unparalleled proportions for him in Buffalo. And the Buffalo Police Department scoured the east side of Buffalo for days and months looking for Sly Green. Missed him on a few occasions. We would get tips, constant anonymous tips as to where Green was. We'd go and we'd look, wouldn't be able to find him. Come to find out later, we were just a few steps behind him.
One night within a few weeks of the murder, investigators spotted Green's Mercedes parked in front of the home of one of his known associates. Detectives staked out the house. They were disrupted when a TV news van monitoring police scanners arrived on the scene. Their cover blown, police immediately raided the house. If Green had been there, he was gone. A Authorities were getting frustrated. The longer it took to apprehend the fugitive, the more difficult it would be to catch him. And the prosecutors feared that Sly Green's reign of terror would continue. On the gang-infested streets of Buffalo's tough East Side, Larnell Cottrell was gunned down in October of 1988. Police had little physical evidence, but they did have an eyewitness to the murder. James Wright, a church janitor, had picked notorious gang leader Donald Sly Green out of a photo lineup the day of the shooting. Months after Cottrell's murder, investigators still hadn't caught the fugitive. As the manhunt continued, 1st Precinct officers were briefed on Sly Green and his gang, with information pulled from dozens of case files. On the East Side streets, detectives spoke to an informant. The informant said he didn't know where Sly was, and no one had seen him for weeks. But the informant said Cottrell's murder was an act of revenge. Cottrell was involved in a numbers racket, he said, and his murder was the latest in a series of killings that dated back several years. The string of killings began in 1986, when a young man named Devotee Pompey was shot to death in an East Side alley. At the time, police suspected that Samuel Green, Sly's younger brother, was the hitman. Samuel Green was arrested for the murder. Police learned the murder victim had worked for an underworld numbers racket. And word on the street was he'd stolen $20,000 from his employers, who in turn hired Samuel Green to kill him for the theft. After his arraignment, Green was released on bail. A few days later, he too was killed. His body was found in the front seat of his car, shot in the head. A police informant said that Samuel was killed after he threatened the bosses who had ordered the hit on Pompey, saying he would tell the police what he knew unless they gave him more money. The investigation revealed that the murders of Devotee Pompey and Samuel Green marked the beginning of a gang war between the numbers racket and Sly Green's LA boys. Over a 2-year period, this war left as many as 8 unsolved murders in its wake.
What you guys doing? All right.
Detectives believe the latest casualty of the gang warfare was Larnell Cottrell, also suspected of involvement in the numbers racket. And the latest murder suspect was Sly Green.
Green had indicated that he was going to get even somehow, that there was a history there that made the shooting something which was not without motive. The motive was plainly revenge.
Detectives may have pieced together the motive for Cottrell's murder, but they still weren't any closer to finding their suspect. Sly Green continued to elude police for months. Finally, detectives got a lead on where Green was hiding. According to an anonymous tip that came into Buffalo police, Sly Green was in Atlanta, Georgia. Authorities in Buffalo asked for help from the FBI to bring in their fugitive. Assistant District Attorney Joe Marusak was determined to bring Green to justice.
And eventually, as a result of some information developed by them, and I believe Buffalo police, were able to track down Green coming out of a fast food restaurant in Atlanta, Georgia.
In February of 1989, almost 4 months after the murder of Larnell Cottrell, FBI agents intercepted Sly Green as he was strolling down a city street and arrested him without incident. The notorious Sly Green was finally in custody. The leader of the LA boys was returned to Buffalo to face murder and weapons possession charges. Green was held without bail to await trial. With the suspect in custody, the Erie County District Attorney's Office prepared to prosecute him. The cornerstone of their case would be witness James Wright.
He was a witness every prosecutor just dreams for. Conscientious, reliable, family man, no criminal record. It's somebody who, if you talk with him for a while and get to know him, you can tell he couldn't tell a lie if he wanted to. So you want the jury to see James Wright. And the more they see him, the more they're going to like him, the more they're going to respect him, the more they're going to rely on him.
In the months leading up to the trial, prosecutors were concerned that Wright, like many fearful witnesses in previous cases, could change his mind and decide not to testify. If that happened, the case against Sly Green would not even make it to trial. Late in August 1989, 6 months after Sly Green's arrest in Atlanta, James Wright contacted the district attorney's office. He had startling news.
Again, I want to thank you for coming forward.
Wright explained he had been repeatedly threatened by Garland Kaiser,
Are you okay?
a known member of Sly Green's gang, and there had been several attempts made on his life. Somehow, the LA boys had found out the identity of the prosecution's key witness.
Just encountered a drive-by.
There was an oversight, a slip-up, as there is in any investigation. I mean, nothing is ever perfect. If someone wants a crime report about any incident, really, they can go to the Buffalo Police Department, at least they could at the time, and for 25 cents, get a copy of that report.
Authorities later determined that an investigator working for Donald Green had picked up a copy of the report listing James Wright as a witness in the case. Soon after that, the threats and attacks on Wright and his family began. Afraid to go to the police for fear of reprisals against his family, Wright kept silent for months. Now he detailed a series of increasingly frightening encounters beginning in June, when Kaiser knocked on his door late one night. Kaiser warned Wright that he knew Wright was planning on testifying against Sly Green. Unless he changed his mind, he and his family would be in grave danger.
Tell me again what it was you saw.
A few days after his encounter with Kaiser, Wright was awakened around 4 a.m. to find his car had been firebombed. A few nights later, he heard a crash against a window in his son's bedroom. He found an unexploded Molotov cocktail outside on the ground. Then, on another evening, gunshots rang. Wright discovered bullet holes in a bedroom wall and a closet.
Look at this. Look at this.
One bullet
Shoot
had
at us
come within
now.
inches of his son's head.
Jack, look at this.
In July, Kaiser and 2 other men spoke to Wright outside the church where he worked.
How you doing today, Mr. Wright? Doing all right, sir.
They questioned him about the day of the killing. Intimidated, Wright told them what they wanted to hear. That he could not identify Sly Green as Catrell's killer. As the men were leaving, Kaiser handed Wright $100, a reward for cooperating. He at first was unwilling to accept it, but Kaiser insisted, telling Wright that refusal would put him and his family in more danger. He reluctantly took the money. Several weeks passed without an incident. Then, on the morning of August 28th, as Wright was driving his wife to work, they were the victims of a drive-by shooting. Wright was cut by broken glass. his wife was unharmed. It was time to go to the authorities.
You know, he was more angry than he was scared. I mean, he was scared, make no mistake. But he was angry. He was angry that they would try to do that to him. He was angry about how it had upset his life. He was angry at me because somehow he looked to me as though I had let him down. If you'd been doing your job, Clarky, this wouldn't be happening. And it was very difficult because I wasn't exactly sure what we were going to do myself.
The district attorney's office arranged to move the Wright family out of Buffalo. The prosecutors could only hope that Wright and his family would be safe until the trial, and that the LA boys' tactics to keep the witness quiet wouldn't work. Prosecutors in Buffalo were preparing for the murder trial of Sly Green, the suspected shooter in the 1988 murder of Larnell Cottrell. The key witness in the case, James Wright, had already survived attempts on his life by the LA boys, the gang headed up by Sly Green. The Wright family was relocated to a relative's house at an undisclosed location outside the city. But soon, police learned that the Wrights were still in danger. According to an informant, the Wrights' location had been leaked, and members of the LA boys were out to kill the witness before he could testify.
We were getting information from a couple of different sources that they had hit teams out to kill him. A team of Crips out of Los Angeles that were going to come, another group supposedly from Buffalo that had a contract out on him.
Days after they had moved in, the police discovered the gang's plan and relocated Wright and his family to a hotel. Citing the attempts made on the lives of James Wright and his family, prosecutors petitioned the court for the earliest possible trial date. The judge agreed, and an early trial date was set. The defense also petitioned the court to disallow Wright's testimony. Again, the judge ruled in the prosecution's favor.
Dismissed. Court's adjourned.
The rulings were victories for Assistant District Attorney Joseph Maruzak.
Without James Wright's testimony, Sly Green doesn't get indicted, doesn't go to trial, doesn't get convicted. It's that simple. Without James Wright, we have no prosecution.
Sly Green was represented by one of the top defense attorneys in Buffalo, Paul Cambria.
I believe that Donald Green did not murder this individual. Obviously, someone was murdered, and they were murdered for a purpose. Probably did have to do with the drug trade that was going on the east side. It just wasn't Donald Green.
To secure an acquittal, the defense would have to destroy James Wright's testimony on the stand. On October 31st, 1989, 1 year after the shooting death of Larnell Cottrell, the murder trial of Donald Green began. Security at the Erie County Courthouse was at an all-time high.
The security was beyond anything that I had been associated with previously. And every step, every precaution was taken to ensure that no harm came to James Wright.
Snipers were placed on a roof overlooking the courthouse. A metal detector was installed in the lobby, and armed guards searched everyone entering the courtroom. The defense attorney believed the highly visible security measures were excessive and would prejudice the jury against his client.
So by the time we got to trial, this is the image that was seared into the minds of all of these potential jurors that we were going to have in this case, that this was the worst individual who has ever been in our community.
The jury would hear brief opening statements. The state's case, the prosecutor said, was built around the eyewitness testimony of James Wright, who had identified Sly Green from a police photo lineup hours after Larnell Cottrell's murder.
You didn't go to the best schools.
While there was no forensic evidence
Facts
linking Green
demonstrate
to the shooting,
that the eyewitness identification
the
of James
prosecutor
Wright
told the
and
jury
Stephen
that the
Brown
circumstantial evidence in the
credible,
case, as well as the testimony of
consistent with all
Stephen
the other
Brown,
evidence in the
would
case.
corroborate Wright's
Those facts
identification of the killer.
It was a street execution with one reliable eyewitness and not much physical evidence. In fact, no forensic evidence that connected Sly Green to this murder. None whatsoever. So it was a lot of circumstantial evidence and James Wright's identification.
Now, you described to us that you saw the defendants.
The prosecution told the jury the circumstantial evidence
Consistent with
included the
all the other
fact that the
evidence in
men
the
Wright
case.
followed were running
Those
away
facts
from the
were
crime
proven.
scene. The bullets found at the scene matched the type of gun they pointed at
October
Wright,
25th, 1980.
and the abandoned car matched the one Wright had seen them drive away in. In opening statements for the defense, Green's lawyer emphasized to the jury that there was no direct evidence linking his client to Cottrell's murder, and that James Wright's identification was wrong. Eyewitness testimony, the attorney explained, is very unreliable.
Which you may have read about in the paper.
Well, we knew that it was going to be an eyewitness case, and it was going to be a matter of eyewitness identification. And unfortunately, the public at large thinks that eyewitness identification is a very reliable kind of way to identify people, but it's probably the most unreliable. And so it's the kind of case where you realize that it's unreliable testimony, but you also realize the perception by people in general is that, you know, when somebody says that's the man, that they really know what they're talking about. But if you think about it, how many times have you thought that you saw a friend of yours who you've known your whole life, and then you go up and tap them on the shoulder and they turn around and it turns out to be a total stranger and you're embarrassed? But just prior to that tap, if someone would have asked you to bet everything you owned on whether or not that was the person, I'm sure you would have said that it was. And the problem is that eyewitness identification is very unreliable. But that was the whole core of this case.
Flanked by 8 sheriff's deputies armed with shotguns and automatic rifles, the prosecution's first witness, custodian James Wright, took the stand.
Left hand on the Bible, right? Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole
For
truth?
the first time since the day Larnell Cottrell was shot, Wright found himself face to face with Donald Sly Green. Wright's testimony took hours. Under direct examination by the prosecution, he told the jury what he witnessed the day of the shooting.
Right. Now, you
He
mentioned
testified that he was dropping off groceries in the neighborhood when he heard a scream.
Followed him. You chased him.
Seeing 2 men running away, he followed them in the church van he was driving. He pursued the suspects around a corner. Just as they were getting into a car, one of the men doubled back. Wright found himself staring down the barrel of a loaded revolver.
Come on, let's go! Come on, let's go! Come on, come on, come on!
So he's pointing the gun at you. What'd you do then?
Well, I motioned don't shoot. There's nothing else I could do. I mean, he just was staring at me, and I was staring at him, and he was still staring at me, as if to say, don't you come another foot farther. And I was just sitting there saying to myself, I'm going to remember this day for the rest of my life.
When you say he had a gun on you, what do you mean?
He was pointing it at my head. He just pointed it at me, just like that, you know.
Do you see the person in the courtroom today that pointed the gun at you?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us where he is and describe an article of clothing that he's wearing?
He's wearing a suit.
Where is he?
He's sitting down next to the gentleman up front. Can I point at him?
Yes, you can.
That's him. That's him right there.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Wright also
No
gave a
further
description of the Ford Escort the defendant used to flee the scene.
No further questions.
With the prosecution's case hinging on Wright's testimony, defense attorney Paul Cambria's strategy would be to convince the jury that although the prosecution's key witness, James Wright, was an honest and brave man, his testimony was dead wrong.
We had to be very careful with Mr. Wright because, you see, he had presented himself as, I'm just a poor custodian in a church and I just happened to be driving by. I thought there was a purse snatching. I was a good Samaritan. I got involved. And so, you know, you can't exactly beat someone like that up. I mean, that's a counterproductive move. On the other hand, it's important to show that he's committed himself to an ID, but he's committed himself erroneously to an ID.
The defense attorney drew the jury's attention to discrepancies in Wright's testimony.
Wright said it wasn't raining the day that this happened, and everybody else there said that it was raining. They all said it was raining, it was drizzling, it was fogging, and all the rest of it. Wright says it was, you know, totally dry that day. He has the person who's doing it short. The other people say it was a tall, slim individual.
Thank you.
The prosecution would counter the defense's attack on Wright with the testimony of their next witness, who would corroborate Wright's identification of the killer. The prosecution called Stephen Brown to the stand. Brown told the court that he was on the street the day Larnell Cottrell was killed.
Show up to workout time, okay?
He said he had witnessed the shooting.
Became a witness.
Brown testified that he saw two men walk up to the victim. One of them fired at least 2 shots, and the victim fell to the ground.
You became a witness in this case.
After the shots were fired, he said, he went to his girlfriend's house before police arrived on the scene. Brown backed up James Wright's assertion that Donald Sly Green was Cottrell's killer. Knowing the defense would attempt to discredit their witness, the prosecutor established that despite Brown's known drug addiction and a recent arrest for shoplifting, he had not made a deal with the prosecution in return for his testimony.
Did you color your statement in any way?
Brown went on to testify that he had in fact pled guilty to the shoplifting charges and was sentenced to 60 days in jail. Brown was cross-examined by the defense, who pointed out that he had not come forward until after he had been arrested for shoplifting. The defense did not dispute that Brown was at the scene, but they claimed he arrived after the police were there and had learned more about the crime by watching the newscast that evening. His testimony, the defense claimed, was a calculated lie, constructed by a street-savvy criminal who knew how to work the system. Police officer Carl Thompson also testified for the prosecution.
Raise your right hand, place your left hand on the Bible.
The Buffalo Police Department's evidence collection unit had been unable to place the defendant in the getaway car through fingerprint analysis.
Yes, sir. 3 years.
But Thompson testified to having seen Sly Green getting out of the car a few days before the shooting. Thompson's testimony connected Donald Green to the same vehicle that Wright had identified as the getaway car on the day of the shooting. As the trial continued, prosecutors had growing concerns about the state of mind of the jurors. The forewoman had told the judge that some of the jurors did not want to be in the same room with Green. Even in a court of law, Donald Green was able to strike fear into the hearts of 12 strangers. The prosecution hoped that fear would not keep the jurors from rendering a guilty verdict in the case. By late November of 1989, the trial of Buffalo gang leader Donald Sly Green was drawing to a close. He was charged with the murder of Larnell Cottrell. For both sides, the case rested on whether the jury believed the testimony of a church janitor.
And you'll see.
James Wright was the prosecution's key witness. He testified that he saw the suspect fleeing the crime scene moments after the shooting. In closing arguments, the defense reminded the jury that there was no forensic evidence linking his client to the shooting, and asserted that James Wright, while a courageous man, had wrongly identified Green.
Well, Wright was mistaken. There's no question that at some point in time he was threatened, no doubt about it. But there's also no question in my mind that he was mistaken.
I ask you simply
In the
this.
prosecutor's closing statement, he reminded the jury that the testimony of the state's key witness, James Wright, had been corroborated by an eyewitness to the murder, as well as by the circumstantial evidence in the case. The jury's decision would hinge on whether they believed James Wright.
James Wright was, without a doubt, the most critical, essential witness to the entire case. He was the linchpin for all the evidence.
Following the closing statements, the jury was sequestered to decide the guilt or innocence of Donald Sly Green. During deliberations, the jury forewoman made an extraordinary request. She sent a message to the judge asking that the defendant not be in the courtroom during the reading of the verdict. Judge Timothy Drury.
This is a man whose his personality became obvious to the jury. The type of person he was became clear to them. And although he was quiet and restrained during the trial that they observed, during the trial itself, they understood what he was like.
Judge Drury declined the jury forewoman's request, though he said he understood the anxieties that prompted it. After only 6 hours, the jury had reached a decision.
Will the defendant please rise?
They found Donald Sly Green guilty of second-degree murder in the October 1988 shooting of Larnell Cottrell.
Court's adjourned.
Green received the maximum sentence, 25 years to life. Sly Green's attorney would appeal his case to the Appellate Division of the State Supreme Court, arguing that the jury had been prejudiced by heavy courthouse security, as well as news accounts of the trial. The higher court rejected the appeal. In the wake of the trial, Erie County Deputy District Attorney Frank Clark appealed to the U.S. Department of Justice to have the Wright family admitted into the Federal Witness Protection Program.
And in my opinion, the only way that we would ever be able to ensure the long-term safety of this family was to get them into the program. And my initial overtures were met with sympathy, but no practical response because there was no federal connection. This was a state homicide, and it had no federal ramifications at all.
But when Clark argued that Wright may need to testify if Sly Green were later charged with federal crimes, Wright and his family were accepted into the program. Green began serving his 25-year prison term, but authorities were still keeping close tabs on him. They suspected that he was still directing the operations of the LA Boys, even from behind bars. Sly Green was in prison for murder, but authorities in Buffalo suspected that he was still controlling the activities of his gang, the LA Boys, from behind bars. The district attorney's office called in the FBI. Wiretaps were placed on the prison phone Green used. The FBI quickly determined that Green was still at the helm of his gang, giving orders to subordinates, orchestrating cocaine and heroin deals, plotting kidnappings and other crimes, all from behind bars.
He was in complete control of that organization from prison as though he had never left. Organizing, ordering, controlling, demanding, in every bit as direct a fashion from prison as he did from the streets. They didn't do a thing without his approval.
In one instance, gang members kidnapped a local store owner.
Time for you to pay up. Open the door. You're collecting too much. Get in there.
On telephone orders from the imprisoned Green, The kidnappers released the man after they received $25,000 in ransom. And it was all on tape. Investigators learned through the wiretaps that Sly's wife was heavily involved in gang activities. FBI documents showed that she helped her husband run the operation, setting up three-way phone conversations for him and his associates. The wiretaps also revealed that she even encouraged her husband to order the murders of two drug associates, one of whom was Sly's own brother, Clayton Green. Federal investigators were surprised to learn that Judy Spidell Green led a double life. By night, she was a major underworld figure. By day, she was a social studies teacher in Buffalo's public school system. On July 9, 1992, 26 members of the LA Boys, including Donald Green, his wife Judy, two brothers and other relatives, were indicted on federal charges related to drugs, racketeering, and gang violence. The indictments covered 73 counts and were based on more than 900 FBI tapes and some 6,000 pages of documentation. Within weeks of the federal indictments, the Green family empire began to crumble. Sly's relatives, friends, and associates began accepting plea bargains, agreeing to testify against the once mighty leader of the LA Boys gang.
Would you please present your first witness?
Now safe in the federal witness protection program and far away from Buffalo, James Wright returned to testify once more against Sly Green, the man he helped put away for the murder of Larnell Cottrell. He recounted his meeting with gang henchman Garland Kaiser.
He wanted to know why I was testifying against Mr. Green when Mr. Green had never done anything to me. He told me they would do a ride-by on me. He told me that he watched my son ride his bike to school every day. And how would I like it if they shot him?
Wright recounted the threats he received, the attacks on his home, the firebombing of his car, and the gunshots that had narrowly missed his son's head.
After that, I went to church. I went to church and I brought back 4 metal chairs and lined them up around my son's beds to stop the bullets.
In March 1994, Donald Sly Green was found guilty on 26 counts and sentenced to 4 terms of life imprisonment with no chance of parole. In 1 year alone, 22 members of the LA Boys pleaded guilty to an assortment of felony drug charges. Finally, the LA Boys' hold on Buffalo's East Side had been broken.
It all goes back to James Wright and his unbelievable and unparalleled, and at least in my experience, courage to just risk his life, his wife's life, his children's life, and stand up and say, okay, I'll lose everything I have in Buffalo. I'll leave my family, my parents, and everybody else, and I'll do this. And it's rare, it's uncommon that you'd ever see that from anybody. I don't know if I'd be willing to do that, but he did. And there's no question that the east side of Buffalo was safer as a result.
In October 1994, James Wright was awarded the Lou E. Peters Memorial Service Award for his courage and heroism in testifying against Donald Green. Although James Wright would never be able to live in Buffalo again, his courageous testimony had helped to transform the city's east side from a war zone back to a neighborhood once again.